Marry me, Miss Ashcombe, or watch your father's name die in the debtor's court within the fortnight. The Duke of Rathmore said it without lifting his eyes from the ledger on the table between them, as though he were reading aloud the price of coal. I hold every note your father signed. I can forgive them in an afternoon, or I can ruin your family so thoroughly that your name is a byword for a generation. The choice, I confess, means very little to me, but it will mean a great deal to you. Julian Ravensworth, 7th Duke of Rathmore, had rehearsed none of it, which was perhaps why it came out so cold. He was a man who did not rehearse. He had learned long ago that words spoken plainly and once were rarely questioned, and that a silence held long enough did more work than any argument. So he let the silence fall now, in the shabby drawing-room of Ashcombe Hall, with its damp-spotted ceiling and its threadbare Turkey carpet worn pale at the door, and he waited. Across the table sat the woman he had come to buy. He had expected her to weep. Women wept, in his experience, when confronted with the arithmetic of their own destruction, and he had prepared himself for it with the resignation of a man who dislikes the smell of tears but has grown accustomed to it. He had not expected her to look at him the way she did now, steadily, with a stillness that matched his own so exactly that for a moment he felt the peculiar sensation of looking into a glass. "You have thought this through," she said. "It was not a question. I do not act on impulse." "No." Her eyes moved over him, and he had the uncomfortable impression of being weighed on a scale whose measure he did not know. "I can see that you would consider that a weakness." Julian set down his pen. It was a small thing, but he was aware of doing it, aware that he had wished to have his hands empty, and he did not entirely understand why. "You may keep your opinion of my character, Miss Ashcombe. I have not asked for it. I have asked for your answer." "You have asked for nothing," she said. "You have delivered a sentence and named the reprieve. That is not the same as asking." She was right, and he found he disliked being made to notice it. The room was cold. The fire in the grate had been built of green wood and gave more smoke than heat, and he understood that this too was a matter of economy, that the Ashcombes were burning what they could not sell. Her gown was 3 seasons out of fashion and had been turned at the cuffs by a careful hand, her own, he suspected, and yet she sat in that ruined room as though it were a throne room, her spine straight, her chin level, and she looked at the Duke of Rathmore as if he were the one being examined. He was not a man given to curiosity. He had trained it out of himself, along with a great many other appetites that had once caused him grief, but he was curious now, and the sensation was so unfamiliar that it made him irritable. "Your father," he said, "has run through his fortune and a great part of his creditors' patience. His estate is entailed and produces nothing. He has 2 younger daughters and a son at school whose fees have not been paid since Michaelmas. Within the month the whole of it will be sold at the door, and your family will be turned out to the charity of relations who, I am given to understand, have none to spare. I am offering you the alternative. I will settle every debt, restore the house, provide for your sister's seasons and your brother's education, and secure your mother a jointure. In exchange, you will become the Duchess of Rathmore. It is, by any reckoning, a generous bargain. For whom? For everyone at this table." "There is only one person at this table who is to be sold," she said. "Let us at least be honest about the transaction." Julian looked at her a long moment. Somewhere above them a floorboard creaked. The house was full of small failing sounds, the sounds of a great thing coming quietly apart. He thought of his own house, Rathmore, 40 miles north, with its long galleries and its cold vast silence, and he thought that he had chosen this woman precisely because he had believed her too desperate to trouble him. He required a wife. The succession required it. His aunt reminded him of it in every letter. The family solicitors reminded him of it in every quarter. He required a wife who would give him an heir and otherwise leave him in the peace he had earned, and he had made his inquiries. And he had been told that the eldest Ashcombe girl was 25, unmarried, plain and clever, clever being offered as the reason for the unmarried, and that her family was drowning. A woman drowning does not argue with the man holding the rope. She takes it and is grateful. This woman did not appear to feel that she was drowning. She appeared to feel that he was. "You are not plain," he heard himself say, and was appalled. Something flickered across her face, surprise, and then something colder, a kind of armor sliding into place. I did not imagine that would signify to a man buying a brood mare. You require an heir, your grace. You did not come to Ashcombe for my complexion. No, he agreed, recovering himself. I did not. Then we understand each other. She folded her hands in her lap, and he noticed that they were not quite steady, and that she was holding them still by force of will, and that this cost her something. It was the only crack he had seen. You want a wife who will bear you a son and ask you nothing. You want to buy that with my family's safety. Very well. I will not pretend to you that I would choose you if I were free to choose. I would not. But I am not free, and you have arranged that I am not, and I imagine you knew precisely what you were doing when you arranged it. My father is a foolish man who loves his family and has failed them, and my mother has not slept a full night since the autumn, and my sisters believe I do not hear them praying. So yes, your grace, I will marry you. I will be your duchess, and I will do my duty, and I will keep your house. And I will ask you nothing, and you will keep your side of it to the last farthing, because if you do not, I will make certain that every drawing room in England knows exactly what manner of man buys his wife by drowning her father first. Julian was quiet. He had come expecting to conclude a purchase. He found instead that he had entered into a treaty, negotiated by a woman with nothing in her hand but her own composure, and that she had somehow contrived to be the one dictating terms. He ought to have been affronted. He was instead, and to his considerable unease, something perilously close to impressed. I will keep my side of it, he said. You need not threaten me. I do not break my word. It is nearly the only thing I have left that I have not broken. She looked at him then with an expression he could not read, not gratitude, certainly, but something arrested, as though he had said more than he intended and she had heard it. He had said more than he intended. He resolved not to do so again. There is a condition, she said. You are in no position to set conditions. I am in the only position from which conditions are ever worth anything, she answered. You need me to say yes. Until I do, everything you have described is theory. So I will set a condition, and it costs you nothing, which is why you will grant it. My father is not to know that I was bought. You will let him believe you offered honorably, and I accepted gladly. He is a ruined man and a foolish one, but he loves me, and I will not have him spend the rest of his life knowing that his folly cost his daughter her freedom. He is to think I am happy. That is the condition. Julian regarded her. It was, he reflected, an extraordinary thing to ask. She had bargained away nothing for herself, no allowance, no assurance, no protection against him, and spent her single advantage on the comfort of a man who had ruined her. He had known men who would sell a sister to a stranger to save their own skins. He had known women who would sell a great deal more for a good deal less. He had not known anyone, in a long time, who spent their last coin on someone else's peace. Granted, then I accept. She rose. She was taller than he had registered, and she extended her hand, not the soft trembling hand of a woman surrendering, but the firm hand of one closing a contract. He took it. Her fingers were cold, the room was cold, and steady now, the tremor mastered, and he held them a moment longer than the gesture required and then released them. When? 3 weeks. I have a special license. The banns would take too long, and your father's creditors will not wait. Of course they will not. A ghost of something bitter crossed her mouth. You have thought of everything. It is my habit. I begin to see that. She moved to the window, where the grey light fell across her face. And he saw that she was tired in a way that went deeper than a single sleepless night. Tired the way a person is tired who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and has only just now been told she may set it down, and does not quite believe it. May I ask you something, your grace, before we are strangers married to one another? You may ask, why me? You are a duke. You could have any heiress in the kingdom, some pretty biddable girl with a fortune of her own and a mother eager to be pleased. Why come 40 miles into the country to purchase a bankrupt's daughter? He had a ready answer, and it was true, and he gave it. Because an heiress comes with a family, with obligations and connections, and a mother who calls, and a father with opinions, and 100 people who consider themselves entitled to a share of my life by virtue of the settlement. I do not want a share of anyone's life, Miss Ashcombe, nor do I wish to surrender a share of mine. I wanted a wife who would come to me alone and want nothing from me but the keeping of a bargain. You are, if I may say so, admirably alone." She turned from the window and looked at him, and for the first time something in her face was not armor. "Yes," she said quietly, "I am. And Julian." Duke of Rathmore, who prided himself on wanting nothing, felt, for one unwelcome instant, in that cold and failing room, that he had said something cruel to a person who had done nothing to deserve it, and that he would remember it, and that this was the beginning of a great deal of trouble he had not budgeted for. He gathered his ledger and his hat, and his conviction that he had done a shrewd and unsentimental thing, and he took his leave. He did not know, riding north through the raw December dusk, that he had that afternoon made the single decision that would unmake him. He believed he had bought a convenience. He had, in fact, met the one person alive who would refuse gently, inexorably, and to his lasting undoing, to let him remain the man he had made himself into. Her name was Marianne. He had not, in the whole of the interview, once used it. He found on the long cold road home that he could not stop hearing it. They were married on a bright hard morning in the last week of December, in the small stone church at the edge of the Ashcombe land, with a frost still white in the shadows of the yews. It was, by Julian's design, a modest affair. He had no wish for spectacle, and less wish for the county to gather and speculate, and so there were present only the immediate family, the vicar, and 2 of his own people brought down from the north to serve as witnesses. He stood at the altar in a dark coat and watched her come up the short aisle on her father's arm, and he observed with the detachment he cultivated that she was very pale and very calm, and that she looked at no one but him. Her father wept. Sir Edmund Ashcombe, a stout ruined man with kind foolish eyes, wept openly through the whole of the service, and Julian understood, watching him, that Marianne had kept her condition. The old man believed his daughter was making a splendid match, that a great duke had seen her worth and lifted her up, that his own disgrace had somehow, miraculously, been the road to her happiness. He wept from joy and relief and shame all tangled together, and he gripped Julian's hand afterward in both of his and could not speak, and Julian, who did not care for being touched, stood and allowed it, and thought of his own father, who had never in his life wept for him, and looked away. Marianne made her vows in a clear, steady voice. She did not falter over l'honneur and obey. She said the words as though they were a treaty she intended to keep to the letter and not one syllable beyond it. When it came his turn, Julian said them the same way, and the 2 of them stood before God and a weeping old man and pledged themselves to a lifetime of scrupulous, loveless exactitude. He put a ring on her cold finger. She did not smile. Neither did he. Somewhere behind them one of her sisters gave a small suppressed sob of happiness, and Julian thought that never in his life had he attended a ceremony so full of feeling in which the 2 principal parties felt so little they either was willing to admit. They travelled north the same day. He had arranged it so. There was no wedding breakfast worth the name to be had at Ashcombe, and he had no patience for the long false hours of a celebration nobody in the case truly felt. She said her goodbyes in the frost-white yard, and he stood by the carriage and watched. She embraced her mother, who clung to her. She embraced her 2 sisters, who wept and laughed and told her she would be the grandest lady in the north. She knelt in the mud of the yard, heedless of her travelling dress, to hold her small brother, home from school for the wedding. And Julian saw her whisper something in the boy's ear that made him nod fiercely and stand up straighter. And last she came to her father, and the old man took her face in his hands and said something Julian could not hear, and Marianne, who had not wept in the church, who had said her vows like a woman signing a bill of sale. Marianne closed her eyes and let 2 tears fall and did not brush them away. Then she straightened and mastered herself and walked to the carriage, and Julian handed her up, and she took her seat across from him with her spine straight and her face composed, and only her hands, folded too tightly in her lap, betrayed that anything at all had been broken that morning. The carriage pulled away. She did not look back at the house. He noticed that she made herself not look back, that she fixed her eyes on the middle distance and held them there by will, the way she had held her hands still in the drawing-room. And he understood that this was how she managed her feelings, not by mastering them, which no one could, but by refusing them the satisfaction of being seen. "You may look back," he said. "There is no one here to observe you but me, and I do not count." She turned her head slightly, but not toward the window. It is easier not to. As you wish. They rode in silence for some miles. The winter country rolled by, brown and grey and folded, the bare hedgerows stitched with frost, and Julian looked at his new wife and tried to feel the satisfaction of a bargain well concluded. He had, in the space of one morning, secured the succession, silenced his aunt, and settled the whole vexed question of his marriage for the price of a country baronet's debts, which he could well afford. He had done exactly what he set out to do. He waited to feel the cold, clean satisfaction of it. He felt, instead, that he had done something to the woman across from him that he did not have the right to have done, and that no ledger anywhere would ever quite balance it. "You did not tell your father the truth," he said, more to break his own thoughts. "No, we agreed I would not. He believes you happy. He believes I am the luckiest woman in England." Her voice was even. "He will die believing it. That is what I bought with the only thing I had to sell that was mine to sell. You may think it a poor bargain. I think it the best I have ever made." Julian was quiet. Then he said, because it was true and because for some reason he wished her to know it, "I do not think it a poor bargain. I think it the finest thing I have seen anyone do in a very long time." She looked at him, then really looked, the guarded, assessing look she had given him in the drawing room, and he met it, and something passed between them that was not warmth, not yet, but was at least the acknowledgement that each had seen the other do a hard thing without flinching. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "A colder man. A man who felt nothing." She studied him. "I begin to think you feel a great deal, Your Grace, and have simply decided not to. That is a different thing entirely, and a good deal more dangerous." He did not answer. He turned his face to the window, and the winter country ran on, and he thought that she was wrong, that he had not decided not to feel, but had genuinely, through long practice, ceased to, and that this was the truest safety a man could purchase. He had been wrong about a great many things that day. He would spend a great many months discovering how wrong. Rathmore came into view in the last grey light of the short day, a vast dark house of grey stone set among its bare parks, its many windows blank and unlit, its great front rising up out of the winter dusk like something that had been left behind by a warmer age. He watched her look at it. He had watched 100 people look at Rathmore, and he knew the expressions, awe, calculation, the greedy softening of a person imagining themselves its mistress. She did none of these. She looked at the great cold house with its dark windows and its air of magnificent abandonment, and what crossed her face was not awe but a kind of recognition, and she said so quietly he almost missed it, "It is lonely." He turned to her sharply. "It is one of the great houses of the north." "Yes," she said, "and it is lonely. One can see it from the road, all those windows and not one of them lit." She looked at him. "How long have you lived here alone?" "I am not alone. There are 40 servants. That is not what I asked." He did not answer that either. But the question stayed with him, unwelcome, as the carriage swept up the long drive to the dark door, and he found that he could not remember, precisely, the last time a lamp had been lit in the west wing, or the last time he had walked the long gallery for any reason but to escape a room he could not bear to sit in. And he thought that she had seen in a single glance from a moving carriage something about his life that he had spent years and a great deal of effort not seeing himself. The servants had assembled in the great hall to receive their new mistress, the housekeeper, Mrs. Foss, grey and correct, the butler, Harding, who had served Julian's father before him, the long line of maids and footmen in their dark livery, ranged beneath the cold portraits of dead Ravensworths who had all of them, so far as Julian could tell, been exactly as unhappy as he was. Marianne came in from the cold and stood among them, and Julian watched her take the measure of the house and the house take the measure of her. And he saw the servants' faces do the small subtle thing that servants' faces do when they are deciding whether a new mistress is to be feared, endured, or, in the rarest cases, loved. She was gracious. That surprised him. He had thought her cold, or at least guarded. But she went down the line and had a word for each of them, and she remembered Mrs. Foss's name, and she asked Harding how long he had served. And when the old man said 42 years, she said, "Then you know this house far better than I ever shall, Mr. Harding. And I hope you will forgive me my mistakes while I learn it, and Julian saw the old butler's rigid face soften by a degree it had not softened in decades. She was not warm exactly. There was still that stillness about her, that armor, but she was kind. And she was kind in a way that cost her attention rather than mere manners, and by the time she had reached the end of the line the great cold hall of Rathmore felt, very faintly, warmer than it had that morning. Julian noticed this. He noticed it and filed it away and told himself it was of no consequence. The Duchess's chief duty was to run the house, and that he had, evidently, purchased a competent one. He did not permit himself to notice that he had felt, standing in his own hall watching his wife charm his servants, a small unfamiliar tightness in his chest that he could not name and did not care to examine. "You will wish to rest," he said to her, when the line had been dismissed. "Mrs. Foss will show you to your rooms. The Duchess's apartments are in the east wing. They have been aired and prepared. Your maid, I have engaged one. You may replace her if she does not suit, is waiting. We dine at 7. You need not come down if you are tired." "I frequently dine alone. It is no trouble to me. I will come down, as you wish. Your Grace." She paused at the foot of the great staircase, one gloved hand on the cold stone balustrade, and looked back at him across the vast dim hall. "You have not once used my name. In the drawing room, in the church, in the carriage, in your own house, not once. You have said Miss Ashcombe, and now I suppose you will say Duchess, and you will go on for 40 years addressing me as though I were a stranger who happened to be standing where your wife should be." He looked at her. The candlelight from the hall sconces caught the tired, lovely lines of her face, and he was aware, uncomfortably, that she was right, that he had held her name at arm's length precisely because he had felt the danger in it, and that she had seen this too. "Marianne," he said. It came out lower than he meant it and rougher. Something moved in her face. "There," she said quietly. It was not so difficult, and she went up the stairs into the shadows of the great cold house, and Julian stood alone in his hall. Among his dead ancestors and his frightened servants and his 40 years of silence, and understood, with the first cold, clear stir of something like fear, that the woman he had bought to keep his peace was going, without lifting a finger, without meaning to, without so much as raising her voice, to take it entirely apart. The first weeks of their marriage were conducted like a campaign between two generals who have agreed to a truce and do not trust it. They dined together each evening at 7 at opposite ends of a table so long that conversation across it required a raised voice, which neither of them raised. Julian had chosen the seating years before when he had dined alone. He had never had cause to reconsider it. On the third night Marianne came down, surveyed the arrangement, and quietly instructed Harding to lay her place at the corner beside her husband's rather than at the far end. She did not ask Julian's leave. She informed the butler, and the butler looked to Julian, and Julian, caught between his dislike of change and his greater dislike of appearing to care, inclined his head, and from that night they dined at the corner of the table, close enough to speak. She did not fill the silences with chatter which he had feared. She let them stand, but she did not, as he did, use them as walls. When she had something to say she said it plainly, and when she did not she was content to eat in a quiet that was, he noticed this slowly, over many evenings, a companionable quiet rather than a hostile one. He had lived with silence all his life. He had not known it came in kinds. He learned things about her by inches. He learned that she rose early and walked the frozen park before breakfast, in all weathers, briskly, alone, and that she came with colour in her cheeks and her hem soaked, and would not be dissuaded. He learned that she had taken it upon herself, within a week, to go through the whole neglected house room by room with Mrs. Foss, and that she had found in the process a great many things falling quietly into ruin that Julian had not known were there. A music room with a fine pianoforte gone hopelessly out of tune. A conservatory whose plants had all died years ago and never been cleared. A nursery in the east wing, shut up and shrouded, that she had opened and stood a long time inside, and then closed again very gently and not spoken of. He learned, above all, that she had been telling the truth in the carriage, that she asked him for nothing. She did not ask for money, though he had settled a generous allowance on her, and she spent almost none of it. She did not ask for society, though as Duchess of Rathmore she might have filled the house with the county. She did not ask for his time or his attention or his affection. she kept with a scrupulousness that he found first satisfying and then obscurely wounding to the exact letter of their bargain. She was his duchess. She ran his house, and ran it better than it had been run in living memory. She was gracious to his people and dignified before the few callers who came, and she asked him nothing and wanted from him nothing and left him, as he had said he wished, entirely in his peace. He found that he hated it. He did not understand why. He had wanted precisely this. He had ridden 40 miles into the country and ruined a foolish old man to secure precisely this. And now that he had it, a beautiful, clever, self-contained wife who made no demands and disturbed nothing, he found himself of an evening inventing reasons to prolong the dinner. He found himself asking her opinion of things he had already decided, merely to hear her give it, because her opinions were quick and dry, and often better than his own. He found himself, one grey afternoon in January, standing in the doorway of the neglected music room, watching her at the ruined pianoforte, coaxing a thin true melody out of the few strings that still held their pitch, and he found that he did not want to move, and did not want her to stop, and did not want to be caught, and was caught. She looked up. "It is badly out of tune," she said. "But not past saving. Nothing here is past saving, I think. It has only been let alone too long. I did not know you played. There is a great deal you do not know about me, your grace. You did not marry me to know me." She said it without reproach, as a plain fact, and returned her eyes to the keys. "Sir Edmund could not afford my lessons past my 16th year, but I had them before, and one does not forget. It was a comfort at home in the bad years. When one cannot mend the thing that is wrong, it helps to mend some small thing that is not." Julian came into the room. He did not decide to. He simply found himself crossing it, drawn, and he stood by the instrument and watched her hands. "You said the house was lonely," he said. "The first evening. From the road. It is. You said one could see it from the road." She stopped playing and looked at him, and there was in her face a gravity that was almost gentleness. "Yes. How? Because I have lived in a lonely house," she said. "And one recognizes one's own." She was quiet a moment. "Ashcombe was lonely in a different way, not for want of people, we were always crowded, but for want of hope. My father drank his loneliness, and my mother sued hers, and my sisters filled theirs with dreams of the very sort of match you have given me, and I—" She stopped. "I walked. In the mornings, before anyone was awake. It is how I learned to be alone without minding it. So when I saw your great dark house with all its unlit windows, I knew what I was looking at. I was not afraid of it. I only felt sorry that it had gone on so long." Julian looked at her. The winter light was thin and grey through the tall windows, and it lay along the side of her face, and he thought, with a clarity that frightened him, standing in his own ruined music room 40 years into his own ruined life, that he had made a mistake he could not undo. He had told himself he had married a convenience. He had married, he saw now, the one woman in England who could look at the wreck of him and not be frightened and not be greedy and not look away, and who would say, plainly without pity, that it had only gone on too long. "Play something," he said. His voice was not quite steady. "It is out of tune. I do not mind." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she turned back to the keys, and out of the ruined instrument she drew a slow grave air, thin and imperfect and unbearably lovely, and Julian, Duke of Rathmore, stood in the grey January light and listened to his wife play, and felt something shift in his chest that had not shifted in 20 years, some vast cold weight beginning, against all his will and all his careful engineering, very slowly to move. He had a tuner brought from York within the week. He did not tell her he had arranged it. She came down one morning to find the pianoforte true and gleaming and a fire lit in the music room, and she stood in the doorway and looked at it, and then looked at him where he stood at the far end of the hall pretending to read his correspondence. And she did not thank him, and he did not admit it, and both of them understood perfectly what had passed, and neither of them said a word. It was, though neither of them would have named it so, the first gift Julian Ravensworth had given anyone in 11 years without expecting a thing in return. There were others. He did not plan them. That was the strange and disarming thing. He was a man who planned everything, who had built his whole life on the principle that nothing should be left to feeling, and yet he found himself doing small unaccountable things. He noticed she came in cold from her morning walks and had a bench moved to the sunniest corner of the terrace and a brazier set beside it. He noticed she read late and could not get the good candles from Mrs. Foss, who hoarded them out of ancient economy, and he simply had a case of them delivered to her rooms. He noticed she wrote long letters to her family and paid the post herself out of her small allowance rather than draw on the household accounts, out of some fierce pride he did not fully understand. And he quietly gave orders that his wife's letters were to travel in the ducal bag and cost her nothing, and she found out and came to him. "You have been paying my post. The ducal post travels free. It was an absurdity that you should pay it." "It was mine to pay." Her chin was up, the old armor was in her voice. "I do not want to be beholden to you for more than the bargain. That was the whole of it. I keep my side and you keep yours, and I owe you nothing beyond it. Do you understand?" "I cannot," and here her voice caught, just slightly, the first true crack he had heard since the carriage. "I cannot afford to owe you anything, Julian. It is the only thing I have left that is mine. Do you see? My family owes you everything. Every roof over their heads and every meal on their table and every dream my sisters are dreaming they owe to you. If I owe you too, then there is nothing left of me at all that you did not buy. And a person must keep something. A person must keep one thing." Julian stood very still. She had used his name. She almost never used his name, and she had used it in a moment of such naked feeling that he understood, all at once and completely, the whole architecture of her pride, and why she guarded it, and what it had cost her to guard, and how alone she was inside it. Keeping her one thing, the last unbought corner of herself, against a man who could buy anything. "I did not mean it as a debt," he said. "Marianne, I did not mean it so." "Then how did you mean it?" He did not know how to answer. He had never in his life had to explain a thing he had done from feeling, because he had never done one. "I meant," he said slowly, working it out even as he spoke, "that it distressed me to see you count out your own coins for the letters you write to a family I took from you. That is all. It was not a purchase, it was—" He stopped. The word he wanted was one he had not used in so long it felt foreign in his mouth. It was kindness. "Or I meant it to be. I am out of practice. I did not consider that a gift can be a chain. I see that it can. I am sorry. Pay your own post, if it must be yours. I will not interfere again." She stared at him. Whatever she had braced herself for, it had not been this, not an apology, not the plain confession of a man admitting he had blundered out of an impulse he could not name. The armor did not fall from her all at once, but it shifted. He saw it shift. "You are a very strange duke," she said at last, unsteadily. "So I am given to understand." He looked at her, and he took then the first true risk of his careful life. He said the thing he felt into the open, unguarded. "I did not know how to do this, any of this. I have not, Marianne, I have not wanted anyone's regard in a very long time, and I do not know the way of earning it, and I keep offering you money because it is the only currency I have ever trusted, and it is the wrong one. I know it is the wrong one, and I do not know what the right one is." The room was very quiet. The fire ticked in the grate, and Marianne Ravensworth, Duchess of Rathmore, looked at her husband across the small distance that had been closing between them for weeks without either of them admitting it, and said, very gently, "The right one is time, I think, and truth. Those cost you more than money, which is why you have never spent them. But they are the only currency that buys the thing you are asking for." She paused. "Whatever it is you are asking for." He did not know what he was asking for. He knew only that when she left the room he stood a long time by the cold window with his heart doing something it had not done in 20 years, and he had ridden 40 miles to buy a convenience, and had somehow, catastrophically, without permission and against every intention, begun to fall in love with his wife. There was a night, early in that first winter, before Sabine, before the whole precarious edifice of Julian's careful reserve began visibly to crumble, that he came afterward to think of as the true beginning of things. The night the storm came down off the moors and half unroofed the Fenwick cottages at the far edge of the estate. He was woken near midnight by Harding at his door, grey and apologetic, with word that a chimney had come down on the Fenwick Row and old Martha Fenwick had been hurt, and that the tenants had sent up to the great house because they did not know where else to send. Julian was already reaching for his coat. He had learned, in the 5 years of rebuilding, that a duke who is not present when the roofs come down is a duke who deserves the ruin that follows, and he had never once, whatever else might be said of him, been an absent landlord. But when he came down into the great hall, booted and cloaked, he found the lamps already lit and his wife standing at the foot of the stairs dressed, with a basket over her arm and Mrs. Foss beside her packing linen into it, and her face set in the calm, purposeful expression he was coming to know. "You will take cold," he said. "It is a filthy night. Stay, I will see to it." "You will see to the roof," she said, not unkindly, "and I will see to Martha Fenwick, who by your own account has a broken arm and a household of frightened grandchildren and no one to sit with her while the men mend the chimney. You are very good at roofs, I have no doubt. You are less good, I suspect, at a frightened old woman. Let each of us do the thing we can do." He looked at her a moment in the lamplight, and then he handed her up into the carriage himself, and they went out together into the storm. He did not forget night. He worked in the wind and the driving rain with the tenant men and his own people, hauling the fallen stone clear and rigging a canvas over the broken roof by lantern light. And it was hard, cold, brutal work, and he did it because it was his to do. But what he remembered afterward was not the roof. It was going into the low, warm cottage in the grey hour before dawn, soaked through, to find his Duchess sitting by the fire with old Martha Fenwick's splintered arm in her lap, and the woman's head on her shoulder, and 3 small frightened children asleep in a heap against her skirts, and Marianne singing very low, so as not to wake them, some old country lullaby he did not know, and the whole terrified household gone quiet and safe around her as though she had been mistress of that cottage all her life. She looked up when he came in, filthy and streaming, and she did not exclaim over the state of him, and she did not fuss. She only smiled, a small private tired smile, and moved one of the sleeping children gently aside to make him a place by the fire, and Julian, Duke of Rathmore, sat down on the hearth of a tenant's cottage among the sleeping children with the water running off him into the ashes, and looked at his wife across the small warm room, and felt something he had no name for and did not try to name, and knew only that he did not want to be anywhere else in the world. They rode home in the first grey light. The storm had blown itself out and the world was washed clean, and Marianne had fallen asleep against the squabs almost before the carriage cleared the Fenwick lane, worn out with the long night, her head tipped against the leather, a smudge of ash on her cheek and her hair come loose from its pins. Julian did not sleep. He sat across from her in the pale dawn and watched her sleep, and he thought about the frightened children who had gone quiet against her skirts, and the old woman who had put her head on the shoulder of a duchess she had met 3 hours before, and the ease with which his wife had walked into a stranger's terror and made it safe, and he thought, this is a person who gives. She had told him she asked for nothing and owed nothing and kept her one thing, and it was true, she guarded herself like a fortress. But the guarding was all turned inward, all defense, and everything that faced outward, toward the world, toward frightened children and ruined fathers and old women with broken arms, everything that faced outward simply gave endlessly, without accounting, as naturally as breathing. And he had married her, and she lived in his house, and gave herself to everyone in it and around it, to the servants who had come to adore her, to the tenants, to the county, to a whole world of people who had done nothing to deserve it, and gave to Julian himself in 100 careful ways. The running of his house and the warming of it and her quiet company at the corner of his table gave him everything, in fact, except the one guarded thing, the fortress within the fortress, the heart she had told a dukie in a cold drawing-room a person must keep. And he understood, watching her sleep with ash on her cheek, that he did not want the everything, or rather that he wanted it, but that it was not what he was starving for. He was starving, he realized, for the one thing she would not give, not because he wished to possess it, but because he had begun terribly to wish to deserve it. And a man cannot buy the thing he wishes to deserve. That was the whole trap of it, laid bare to him in a dawn carriage. He had built his life on the certainty that anything worth having could be bought and held, and he had married on that certainty, and now he found himself for the first time in 11 years wanting something no amount of money could touch, wanting it with an intensity that frightened him, and having no idea in the world how a man went about earning what he could not purchase. He did not know it yet that dawn, But the question would rule the next 3 months of his life, and would nearly break him, and would in the end be answered, but not by him. It would be answered by her, in a glass room full of half-saved plants, when she took his face in her hands and told him the thing she had kept had been kept for him all along. But that was still a long winter away, and a woman in still to come between, and a great deal of clumsy silent effort, and one shattering hour of despair still to be got through first. For now there was only the dawn, and the clean-washed world, and his sleeping wife with ash on her cheek, and Julian sitting across her in the pale light learning, too slowly, the shape of what he had begun to want. When the carriage stopped in the great courtyard he did not wake her at once. He sat a moment longer. Then he leaned across and very gently, so as not to startle her, brushed the smudge of ash from her cheek with his thumb, and she stirred and half woke and looked at him with her eyes still soft from sleep, unguarded, not yet remembering to be careful, and for one moment, one single unrepeatable moment before the armor came back, she smiled at him with a whole undefended face, and Julian's heart turned over in his chest so violently that he had to look away. "We are home," he said. His voice was not steady. "Home," she repeated sleepily, and something moved across her face at the word, some flicker of surprise, as though she had not thought of Rathmore as home before, and was startled to find that she had begun to. Then she woke fully, and the carefulness returned, and she straightened and put up her hand to her fallen hair and was the Duchess again, composed and correct. But it had happened. He had seen it. For one moment she had called his cold great house home and had smiled at him as though she meant it, and no amount of subsequent carefulness could make it not have happened. And Julian carried it with him into the house like a coal cupped in his hands against the wind. He thought about it for days. He was not a man accustomed to thinking about feelings. He had spent 11 years arranging never to have to. But he thought about that moment in the carriage, the ash, the sleepy smile, the word home, turning it over and over, and he found that it had done something to him, cracked something, let something in. He began, without quite deciding to watch for her. He would find himself at the library window when she came in from her morning walk, timing it, so that he might see her come up across the frost with her colour high. He would linger over the estate accounts in the small parlour she favoured rather than in his own study, on the transparent pretext that the light was better, so that she might come and go and he might be near her. He, who had spent a decade cultivating solitude as other men cultivate wealth, found himself engineering, with the guilty ingenuity of a schoolboy, 100 small collisions with his own wife. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. But she said nothing, and he could not read what she made of it. And this was the exquisite torment of that first winter, that two people who had each, separately and secretly, begun to fall in love, each believing it entirely unrequited, went on for weeks performing the careful choreography of their bargain, brushing against feeling and retreating, saying everything except the one thing, each too proud and too frightened and too certain of the other's indifference to risk the truth. He gave her gifts in silence because he dared not give her words. She received them in silence because she dared not believe what they meant. And the great house held the two of them in its cold rooms like a held breath, waiting, though neither of them knew it was waiting, for something to force the truth into the open. The something, when it came, wore furs and a brilliant smile and had once been the whole of Julian's ruined heart. But that was still to come. First there was the long, slow sweetening of the winter, the deepening of the small habits that were, though he could not see it, already a kind of marriage truer than the one they had contracted. The dinners at the corner of the table grown easy and unhurried, the evenings in the library where she read in his chair, and he pretended to work and watched her over the top of his correspondence, the mornings when he began, tentatively, to walk out with her, matching his stride to hers across the frozen park, saying little, needing to say little. The silence between them turned somewhere along the way from a wall into a room they both lived in. He taught her the names of the coverts and the histories of the fields. She told him about Ashcombe, the good years before the ruin, her mother's music and her father's foolish generous heart, and the sisters she had half raised, and the small brother she loved fiercely. He learned that her steadiness was not coldness but discipline, hard won, the armor of a girl who had watched her family drown by inches and had decided very young that she would not add her own drowning to the sum of it, would be the one who did not go under, the one the others could hold to. He learned that she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, tired the way a person is tired who has held everyone up for years and been held up by no one, and he found himself possessed by a fierce and unfamiliar wish to be, for her, the thing no one had ever been. The one who held her up. He did not know how to say it. He did not say it. He only one bitter grey morning when the wind came knifing down off the moors and she came in from her walk chilled and shivering, took the cold cloak from her shoulders himself before the footman could, and stood behind her a moment longer than the gesture required, his hands on her shoulders, and felt her go very still under his hands, and neither of them moved, and neither of them spoke, and the whole of everything unsaid hung in the cold air of the great hall between them. And then she stepped away, gently, and thanked him, and went up to change, and Julian stood in the hall with his hands still curved around the shape of her shoulders, and understood that he was lost, wholly and finally lost, and that he had no idea what to do about it. And that he was very likely to go on having no idea until it was almost too late. It was, in the event, very nearly too late. But not quite. That not quite. He owed entirely to her, to the woman who had told a duke that a person must keep one thing, and had kept hers and had. At the last, when everything hung in the balance and he stood before her a coward and a beggar with his heart in his two hands, chosen to give it to him after all, he never forgot how narrow the margin had been. It made him, ever after, a man who said the true thing when he felt it, who never again let a silence stand where a word of love belonged, because he had come so close, so terribly close, to losing everything to his own long habit of silence, and had been saved from it only by the grace of a woman braver than himself. But all of that was still ahead of him, that grey winter morning in the great hall, with his hands curved around the memory of her shoulders and his whole reordered heart hammering in his chest. For now there was only the winter, and the slow sweet unbearable nearness, and the truth gathering like weather, not yet ready to break. There was too the matter of the letters she wrote and never sent. He found them by accident, some weeks into that first winter, before Sabine, before any of it had been spoken. He had gone into the small east parlour. She favoured to leave a book he thought she would like. He was forever leaving her books by then. A whole shy correspondence conducted in the margins of other men's writing, and the wind from the door had lifted a loose sheet from her writing desk and carried it to his feet, and Julian, stooping to retrieve it, had seen, before he could stop himself, that it was a letter, and that it was addressed to no one, and that it was written to him. He ought not to have read it. He read it, whatever his other virtues, a saint, and the sight of his own name at the head of a page in his wife's hand was more than a lonely man could resist. It was not sent because it was not sendable. It was the sort of letter a person writes to empty the heart of what cannot be said aloud, never meaning it to be seen. Your Grace, it began. She called him Your Grace even to the empty air, even the privacy of her own unsent fashion, and that alone undid him. Your Grace, I do not know how to live in your house. You are kinder than the bargain, and I do not know what to make of it. I told myself I would want nothing, and I find I want a very great deal, and none of it is anything you have offered. I want you to look at me the way you looked at me the first morning, before you remembered I was only a convenience. I want to know what you were like before whatever it was that made you so careful. I want. The letter broke off there, unfinished, and beneath it, in a smaller, crabbed hand, as though she had been ashamed of the wanting even to the empty page, she had written only, "But a person must keep one thing, and this must be the thing I keep, so I will not send this. I will not even finish it. Marianne." Julian stood in the small parlour with the unsent letter in his hand and his own heart hammering, and understood, some weeks before he would let himself understand it, that his wife was in love with him and believed it hopeless. He read it 3 times. Then, with a care that surprised him, he laid it back exactly where it had fallen, on the floor by the desk, so that she would never know it had been moved, would never know it had been read, would never lose the one thing she had chosen to keep. And he went out of the parlour and stood in the cold gallery among the portraits and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, because he had just been handed the whole of what he wanted, laid open on a page in his wife's own hand, and could not use it, must not use it, because to reveal that he had read it would be to take from her by theft the very thing she had guarded so fiercely, her right to give her heart freely in her own time, if ever, rather than have it discovered and claimed like a debt called in. So he kept her secret as she had kept his father's. For he had secrets of his own by then, a whole hidden architecture of them, all the small loving things done in silence, and the two of them went on through that winter, each guarding a fortress the other had already, unknown, breached, each in possession of proof of the other's love, and each too honorable or too frightened to use it. It was, Julian thought afterward, the strangest courtship ever conducted. Two people who loved each other, and knew themselves loved, and said nothing, and gave everything, and waited for a woman in furs and a father's fever and a landing and a glass room full of half-saints to finally, mercifully, force the truth they had both been hoarding out into the open air. But he never forgot the letter, long after, years after, when the fortresses had all come down and there were no secrets left between them, when she wrote him letters now that she sent, and read them to him laughing across the breakfast table. He told her one quiet evening that he had read the unsent one, that grey winter morning in the east parlour, and had laid it back on the floor and kept the secret. She was very quiet a moment. Then she said, "I wondered, sometimes, whether you had. I could never be, sheet had lain quite where I left it." And she looked at him with such tenderness that he had to set down his cup. "You knew," she said, "all that winter. You knew I loved you, and you laid the proof of it back on the floor, and you never used it. And you went on giving me the choice you could so easily have taken from me. Oh, Julian." She took his hand. "That was the moment, you know. That was when you earned it. The thing you spent all winter thinking you could not earn. A lesser man would have come to me that afternoon with the letter in his hand and said, 'I know, now tell me.' And I would have told you, and I would have been glad, and I would never afterward have been quite certain I had given it or had it drawn out of me. You gave it back to the floor. You let me keep it until I chose to give it. That is why I could give it, in the end, so completely. Because you had already shown me, without a word, that you would rather want me forever than take one particle of me I did not freely offer. There is no gift a woman could be given greater than that. You gave it to me on a parlour floor and never said a word. I married a bargain, and I got a man who would sooner ache his whole life than steal a single beat of my heart. How was I to do anything, in the end, but give it to him entire?" Julian could not answer her. He only raised her hand to his lips, as he always did, as he had done since the day he begged her in the glass room and learned there was no need to beg, and he held it, and he thought of the young cold ruined man he had been, stooping to lay a letter back upon the floor, choosing, without yet knowing that he chose, to become worthy of a love he did not believe he could ever have. It was the best thing he had ever done, that small secret honourable thing on the parlour floor, and he had done it in silence and told no one for years, and it had bought him, though he had not been trying to buy anything, had for once in his life been trying only to give, it had bought him everything he had, the house full of light, the children, the long gold evenings in the conservatory, the woman beside him who had kept one thing all that hard winter and had at the last given it to him whole. A man could build a life on that, he thought. A man had. And every window of the great house that had once stood dark against the northern road was lit, now and always, because of it. He did not tell her. He was a man of long silences, and this silence he kept most carefully of all, because to speak of it would be to hand her a power over him greater than any he had held over her, and because he did not, in truth, believe that a woman he had bought by ruining her father could ever be brought to feel for him anything but the scrupulous, dutiful, wary tolerance she had contracted to feel. He watched her thaw toward him, for she did thaw, over the slow cold weeks of that winter, but he told himself that what he saw was gratitude and habit, and the natural warming of two people forced into proximity, and that he must be careful not to mistake it for more, because a man who mistakes tolerance for love has handed a stranger the map to every room in his house. So he loved her in silence, and clumsily, and mostly through the small unspoken means he was learning, the true pianoforte, the sunny bench, a horse chosen for her, because he had seen her look too long at his own mare and knew she loved to ride, and had not ridden since her father sold the Ashcombe stable. He gave her, without a word, the freedom of his library, which no one had entered but himself in years, and came in one afternoon to find her curled in his own chair by the fire with one of his books and her feet tucked under her and an expression of such absorbed contentment that he backed out of the room rather than disturb it, and stood in the corridor afterward with his hand pressed flat against the cold wall, unmanned by the sight of a woman reading in a chair. The county began to call. It was inevitable. A duke had married, and the neighborhood would see the bride. Marianne received them with a poise that Julian watched with something close to pride. She was the daughter of a ruined baronet, and she carried the great name of Rathmore, as though she had been born to it, gracious and cool and giving nothing away. And the county went home and pronounced the new duchess a triumph, and remarked among themselves that Rathmore seemed a changed man, less grim, less absent, and speculated in the way of the county as to the cause. And then, in the last week of February, Lady Sabine Calloway came to Rathmore. Julian knew of the visit before she arrived. His aunt, Lady Wexcombe, had written to announce that she would descend upon Rathmore for a fortnight to inspect the new duchess, and that she would bring with her a small party, and that the party would include the widowed Lady Calloway, whom his aunt described, with a transparency Julian saw through at once, as a dear friend of the family who would be such pleasant company for dear Marianne. Julian read the letter twice and understood it completely. Sabine Calloway was not company for Marianne. Sabine Calloway was a warning shot. She arrived in a flurry of furs and beauty, and she was very beautiful, dark, brilliant, assured. A woman who moved through a room as though it had been arranged for her convenience, and she had been, 11 years before, the woman Julian was to have married. He had loved her, or believed he had, in the reckless, unguarded way of a young man who has not yet learned what the world costs. He had been 26, newly come into the title, and Sabine had been the toast of 2 seasons, and he had courted her openly and offered for her and been accepted, and had spent the happiest 3 months of his life believing himself the most fortunate man alive. And then his father's affairs had come out, the debts, the mortgages, the whole rotten scaffolding of the previous duke's ruin, discovered only after his death, and Rathmore had teetered for a single season on the edge of the very abyss into which the Ashcombes had lately fallen. And Sabine Calloway had looked at the arithmetic of it, and had, with charming regret and perfect self-possession, released him from the engagement and married a viscount with unencumbered rents within the 12-month. Julian had rebuilt Rathmore. It had taken him 5 years of grinding, joyless labor, and he had done it, and the estate was sounder now than it had been in a century. But he had rebuilt himself too, in those 5 years, into the man Marianne had described in the carriage, the man who had decided not to feel, because feeling had cost him everything once, and he did not intend to be so poor a fool again. Sabine had done that. Sabine, laughing and lovely and gone, had taught Julian Ravensworth the lesson he had built his whole life upon, that affection is a currency the world debases without warning, that the only safe thing to want is what you can hold in your hand, and that a wife should be a contract and never a hope. And now she was in his hall, widowed and rich and lovelier than ever, extending both gloved hands to him and saying, in that warm, brilliant voice he had once thought the most beautiful sound in the world, Julian, dear Julian, how long it has been, and how very grand you have become. He was civil. He was always civil, but he was aware, with a cold prickling unease, of Marianne standing at his side, watching this reunion with those steady assessing eyes, and he was aware that Sabine had noted his wife with a single flicker of a glance and dismissed her, a country baronet's daughter. Plain by the standards Sabine set, a match everyone knew had been made for the succession and the settlement, and he was aware, above all, that his aunt had brought Sabine here to unsettle him, to remind him of what he had lost and might, as a widower's revenge, be tempted to reach toward again, and that the whole visit was a snare laid with beautiful bait. He did not intend to step into it, but snares do not require your intention. They require only your presence and a witness. The fortnight was a slow torment. Sabine was clever. She was too clever to be openly a rival. And so she was instead a friend, Marianne's friend, ostensibly sought out and confided in and drawn into long tete-a-tetes over the embroidery frame, in the course of which, Julian did not doubt, a great deal of the history was gently, regretfully, devastatingly conveyed. And she was Julian's old, dear, sorrowful friend, forever recalling in his hearing the golden days before his father's ruin, the balls they had danced at, the intimacy they had shared, the great love. She used the word freely, sighing, that fate and misfortune had torn asunder. She never said in words that she regretted releasing him. She said it in 100 other ways, with 100 lingering looks, and she said it so that Marianne would see. 'Cause a woman like Sabine Calloway does not want a man back so much as she wants to be certain, always, that she could have him if she stooped to ask. Julian saw it all. He was not a fool about people. He had only made himself a fool about feeling, once, long ago. He saw exactly what Sabine was doing and precisely why, and he watched, with a helpless mounting dread, its effect upon his wife. Marianne withdrew. It was subtle. She was too proud to sulk and too disciplined to accuse. But the small warmths that had been kindling between them over the winter went cold, one by one. She stopped coming to the library. She played the pianoforte only when she believed the house empty, and stopped when she heard him near. At dinner she moved her place without a word, back to the far end of the long table, and when he tried, awkwardly, to speak to her, for he did try, though he had no gift for it, she was perfectly, unbearably courteous, and gave him nothing, and retreated behind the old armor he had thought was gone, and he understood that he had, without doing a single thing, without so much as a wrong glance, lost the fragile ground it had taken him 3 months of clumsy, silent effort to gain. He came to her at last, on the 11th night of the visit, in the corridor outside her rooms, because he could not bear it any longer. "You have gone away from me," he said, "these 2 weeks. You have gone away, and I do not know how to call you back, and I do not, Marianne, I do not even know what I have done." She turned. She was pale in the candlelight, and there was something in her face he had not seen before, something that was not armor at all, but the thing armor is worn to hide. "You have done nothing," she said. "That is precisely the difficulty. You have done nothing, and I have no right to mind, and I mind. Do you understand what an intolerable position you have put me in? I contracted to want nothing from you. I said it in that dreadful drawing room. I will ask you nothing, I will owe you nothing, I will keep my one thing. And I have kept it all winter, and it has been the hardest bargain I have ever kept, because you would not let me. You with your tuned pianofortes and your sunny benches and your fires laid in rooms I love, you made me," her voice broke, she mastered it, "you made me begin to hope, Julian, against every scrap of sense I possess, that this cold arrangement might come to be something warmer. And then she comes, and I see what you were, and what you lost, and what you would take back tomorrow if she crooked her finger, and I understand at last exactly what I am. I am the bargain you made because you could not have the woman you loved. I am the sensible arrangement. I am the wife you bought because feeling had bankrupted you and you were determined never to feel again. And I have been standing here for 2 weeks watching feeling walk back into your house wrapped in furs, and I've had to smile at her over the embroidery, and I will not. I have kept my one thing all winter, and I will not stand here and let you take the last of it. So yes, I have gone away from you. It was the only safe place left to go." She went into her rooms and shut the door, quietly, which was worse than if she had slammed it, and Julian stood alone in the cold corridor with a candle guttering in the sconce beside him, and understood 2 things at once with terrible clarity. The first was that Marianne loved him. She had said it in the very act of denying it. No woman guards herself so fiercely against a man she does not feel. The second was that he had built the trap she was caught in with his own hands, years ago, and that he had never once told her the truth of it. That the woman in the furs downstairs had taught him not the depth of his loss, but the shallowness of hers. That he did not want Sabine Calloway back, and would not have her if she came to him on her knees. That the only thing in the whole cold expanse of Rathmore he wanted, the only thing he had wanted in 11 years, was standing on the far side of a shut door, believing herself second best. He had never told her. He had loved her in silence, through gifts, like a coward, because to speak would be to risk. And his silence, which he had thought was safety, had become the very thing that was breaking her. He stood a long time in the dark corridor. Then he went down to the library, and he sat by the cold fire, and for the first time in 11 years Julian Ravensworth wept, not for Sabine, whom he did not want, but for the woman upstairs whom he wanted more than his own life, and had never once dared to tell, and for the years he had spent making himself into a man who could not say the one thing that might now save him. The morning after he heard her defend him in the conservatory, the morning Sabine was to leave, before he had yet found her among her plants, before any of it was said, there was an hour when Julian believed he had lost her entirely, and it was the worst hour of his life, and he came near to earning the loss. It began with a letter. A groom brought up from the village post before breakfast, and Julian, seeing it lay by his wife's place at the table, saw also the direction and the hand, and knew it for a letter from Ashcombe. He thought nothing of it. She had letters from her family every week. But when Marianne came down and read it, he saw her face change, go white, and then very still, that terrible held stillness he had learned to read, and he saw her fold the letter small and put it away in her sleeve, and take up her cup with a hand that was not quite steady, and say nothing. "What is it?" he said. It was not a question. "What has happened?" "Nothing that need concern you, Marianne." "My father is unwell," she said low, not looking at him. "A fever. My mother writes that it is not dangerous, that I am not to be alarmed, that I am not to think of coming, which means, in my mother's language, that it is a good deal more than a fever, and that she is very frightened and does not wish to be a trouble to me now that I am a great lady with grand concerns. I know how to read my mother's letters. She has been reading them to me all my life." She set down her cup. "I must go to him. Of course. I will order the carriage. I will come with you." "No." It came out sharper than she perhaps intended, and she saw it land, and she pressed her lips together and tried again, gentler but no less firm. "No, thank you. You have guests. You have Lady Calloway and your aunt, and a fortnight of hospitality to see through. You cannot leave. And Julian, I would rather go alone. I would rather not." She stopped. "I would rather not owe you this too. My father, dying, if he is dying, is mine. Let me have that much unencumbered. Let me sit with my own father without the Duke of Rathmore's carriage in the yard, and the Duke of Rathmore's shadow over the bed, reminding everyone that even this, even my father's, do us by his charity. Please, let me keep this one thing." And Julian, who ought to have understood, who did understand, in the part of him that had watched her all winter, was in that moment so raw with the terror of the whole precarious situation, so worn down by the fortnight of Sabine, and the days of Marianne's withdrawal, and the sleepless nights of wanting what he could not name, that he heard in her refusal not her pride but her rejection, and he answered out of his oldest, coldest self. "As you wish," he said, and his voice had gone flat and hard, the drawing-room voice, the voice of the man who felt nothing. "You will not owe me. You have made that admirably clear all winter. Take the travelling carriage at least. I will not have my wife rattling to Ashcombe in a hired chaise, whatever she owes or does not owe. Harding will arrange it." He saw the words strike her. He saw her flinch, not visibly. She was too disciplined for that. But somewhere behind her eyes he saw the small light he had been coaxing all winter go out, and he knew even as he watched it happen that he had done a terrible thing, had taken her fear at her father's illness and her fierce guarding of her last dignity, and had answered it with ice, had confirmed for her in a single cold sentence everything Sabine had spent a fortnight insinuating, that he was a man who felt nothing, that she was a bargain and no more, that there was nothing in him to hold to. He saw her gather herself and rise and say, quite steadily, "Thank you, your grace. You are very good," in the voice of a stranger, and turn to go and order her packing. And he let her. That was the thing he could not forgive himself afterward. Even from the far side of their long happiness, that in that moment he let his oldest habit answer for him, let the cold man he had built speak in his place, and watched his wife walk out of the breakfast room believing herself unloved, and about to face her father's death alone, and did not call her back. He sat at the table with the ashes of his own coldness in his mouth and let her go up the stairs. It was Harding who saved him. Old Harding, 42 years in the house, who had watched Julian's father die bitter and alone, and had watched Julian grow into the same cold shape and had said nothing, because it was not a butler's place to say anything. Old Harding came to him a quarter of an hour later, where he sat still at the breakfast table, and cleared his throat, and said with the terrifying license of a very old servant, "The travelling carriage is ordered, your grace. Her grace will be down within the hour." And then, after a pause, not looking at him, arranging the covers on the sideboard with unnecessary care, "If I may say so, your grace. Your father let your mother go north to her own people's sickbed once, in just such a way. Told her she needn't be beholden, cold about it, as was his manner. She went alone, and her mother died while she was on the road, and your father and mother were never quite right with one another after, though they lived another 20 years. I was a young man then. I have thought of it often. He straightened. Her Grace is not asking to be beholden, your Grace, whatever she says. In my experience, when a person insists very hard that they want nothing, it is generally because they've wanted something very badly for a very long time, and have given up expecting to get it. Will there be anything else, your Grace? Julian sat very still. Then he stood and went out into the hall and up the stairs, faster than a duke ought to move in his own house. And he found her on the landing outside her rooms with her travelling cloak already on and her maid behind her with a bandbox, pale and composed and about to descend, and he stopped before her, and for a moment no words came. Because the true words were ones he had not used in 11 years and they stuck in his throat. Then he said them anyway. I was cruel to you just now, and I am ashamed of it, and I have come to unsay it. You are frightened for your father, and you asked me for the one dignity of facing it as your own, and I answered you as though you had insulted me, because I am a coward and a fool, and I heard rejection where there was only pride, and I am sorry. I am more sorry than I know how to say. Go to your father. Go alone if you truly wish it. I will not force my carriage or my shadow on your grief. But do not go believing that I do not care whether he lives or dies, or whether you are comforted or alone, because I care, Marianne, and I care more than I have let you see. More than I have let myself see, and I would give a very great deal to be permitted to stand beside you at that bedside, not as the Duke of Rathmore whose charity paid for the bed, but as your husband, who cannot bear to think of you weeping alone on a long road in the cold. That is all. I have said it badly, but I have said it, which is more than I managed a quarter of an hour ago, and I could not let you go without saying it. She stared at him. The maid, sensing storm, had melted back through the doorway. On the landing there was only the two of them and the grey morning light through the tall window and Marianne's face, above the dark travelling cloak, doing something he had never seen it do, the armour not sliding into place but coming apart, the discipline of years failing all at once. So that for a moment she looked simply young and frightened and unbearably tired and about to weep. You confuse me, she whispered. You are cold and then you are kind, and I do not know which is the true man and which is the mask. And I cannot, Julian, I cannot keep guessing. I have not the strength for it, not this morning, not with my father. Her voice broke. Tell me which is true. I am begging you. Tell me which man I am married to, the one at the breakfast table or the one on this landing, because I cannot love a man who is both. It will destroy me, I have to know. And Julian, who had meant to save the whole truth for a better hour, who had 100 reasons of prudence and pride to say it later, more carefully, when Sabine was gone and her father was well and the ground was surer. Julian looked at his wife weeping on the landing with her travelling cloak on and heard her say the word love. Heard her say it as though it cost her blood, and threw prudence to the winds at last. The one on the landing, he said, the one on the landing is true. The one at the breakfast table is a dead man I built out of an old grief, and I have been wearing him for 11 years because he cannot be hurt, and I am done with him, Marianne. I am done wearing him. He is not worth what he costs. The true man loves you. There. I meant to say it better. I meant to say it in a garden or by a fire and not on a landing with your bandbox packed. But you asked me which man is true, and I will not lie to you on this morning of all mornings. The true man loves you, has loved you since the music room, will love you at your father's bedside and every day after for as long as you will have him, and would rather be cruel to himself for the rest of his life than cruel to you for one more hour. That is the true man. Now dry your eyes and let me take you to your father, or send me away and go alone if you must, but do not go believing you are unloved, because it is not true. It has not been true since December, and I will not have you believe it one moment longer. For a long moment she did not move. Then she made a small broken sound, half a sob and half a laugh, and she came into his arms, bandbox and travelling cloak and all, and Julian held her on the landing while she wept at last, all the winter's careful discipline gone. Wept for a frightened father and her long-guarded loneliness and the impossible unlooked-for gift of being after all, and against everything she had braced herself to believe loved. And he held her, and murmured into her hair that it was all right, that he was there, that he would not let her go alone, that he would not let her go at all, and felt her cling to him as though he were the first solid thing she had to hold in years, which he understood he was. They went to Ashcombe together that day in the end, Sabine and the aunt, and the whole fortnight of hospitality abandoned without a backward glance, Harding dispatching the guests with grave satisfaction, and Julian sat with his wife through the 4 hard days and nights of her father's fever. And the old man did not die. He rallied on the 5th day and lived, as it happened, another 9 years. But Julian did not know that yet those 4 nights, and neither did Marianne, and they sat the vigil together, not knowing, her hand in his in the dim sick-room. And somewhere in those long dark hours the lost of the bargain between them quietly dissolved and became something else entirely, something with no terms and no accounting, something that could not be bought and had not been, that had grown up between them unbidden all winter and had needed only a great fear and a landing and a cold man's ruin of his own defences to come finally into the light. He told her the whole truth on the road home, Sabine and the boy he had been, and the 11 years of cold, and the piano tuner from York, all of it. She told him her whole truth in return. And though the great scene in the conservatory was still to come, the true turning had already turned. What remained was only its completion, its saying aloud in full, its sealing. When at last, weeks later, in the green glass room, he stood before her and begged her for her heart, he was not, in truth, asking for something he did not have. He was asking her to say aloud what they both by then already knew. She had given it to him already, on a landing in a travelling cloak, weeping, when she asked which man was true. She had given it in the asking, for one does not beg to know which man to love unless one has already hopelessly decided to love him, and he had given his in the answering. The conservatory only made it words, but some things must be made words, he had learned. Some things must be said aloud into the open air, with nothing held back and no gift to hide behind, or they are never quite real. And so he said them when the hour came, and so did she, and the saying of them was the truest thing either of them ever did. He resolved that night to send Sabine away. It was not so simple as he wished. She had come as his aunt's guest, and to expel her would be to make a public matter of a private wound, and Sabine, he knew her, would be certain to construe her dismissal as jealousy, as proof that she still held power over him, and to carry that construction into every drawing-room in England. But he found in the grey of the following morning that he did not care what she carried anywhere. He had spent 11 years arranging his life to avoid exactly the sort of exposure a scene with Sabine would produce, and he discovered, sitting exhausted in the cold library at dawn, that he would gladly be the talk of every drawing-room in the kingdom if it would put 1 degree of warmth back into his wife's face. But before he could act, Sabine acted at first. She was a strategist in her way, and she had seen the same thing Julian had seen. That the Duke's attention had never once, in the whole fortnight, truly turned toward her, that his eyes went always to his wife, that whatever she had come to reclaim had already, quietly and completely, been given away. And a woman like Sabine Calloway, faced with the discovery that she has been dislodged by a baronet's daughter, does not retire gracefully. She sharpens. She found Marianne alone in the conservatory the next afternoon. Marianne had begun, that winter, to clear the dead plants and had made of the ruined glass house a project, coaxing a few green things back into a room that had held only death, and Julian, passing along the corridor outside, heard voices and, God forgive him, stopped and listened. Because he had learned not to trust Sabine an inch, and he trusted her less near his wife. Such a triumph, my dear, truly, Sabine was saying, in her warm, brilliant voice. You have done wonders with him. He was quite gone to ice when I knew him, you understand. Well, of course you do not understand, you did not know him then, but he was a different creature, so passionate, so alive. It grieves me to see how the years hardened him, though I own it is a comfort to find him settled at last, even if, a delicate pause, even if it is a settlement of the practical kind. One does what one must, does one not, for the name, for the succession. I am sure you have been made to understand the terms of the thing. Julian was always so scrupulous about terms. I understand my marriage perfectly, Lady Calloway. Marianne's voice was cool and even, and Julian, in the corridor, felt a fierce ache of pride at the steadiness of it. You need not trouble to explain it to me. Oh, I know you do, my dear, I know. I do not mean to wound you. It is only, And here Sabine's voice dropped, became confiding, became a blade. "It is only that I feel I owe you a kindness, one woman to another, and so I will tell you what perhaps no one else will. He does not love you, he cannot. I do not say it to be cruel. I say it because I knew what it was to be loved by that man, in the days when he still had a heart to give, and I tell you truthfully there is nothing left of it. He spent it on me, if you will forgive me, and then, when I could not, when circumstances would not permit, he closed the account entirely and never opened it again. You have a very fine house and a very great name and a husband who will be perfectly correct with you for 40 years, and you will never once, my dear, be loved, because the man who might have loved you died the year his father did. I only tell you so you will not do to yourself what I did, will not spend your youth waiting at a door that will never open. Take the house, take the name. Do not, whatever you do, break your heart against the terms of a bargain. That is all I came to say." There was a silence. Julian stood in the corridor with his hand on the cold door frame and every muscle in his body strung to go in, and some last remnant of the cowardice that had ruled him for 11 years, held him back one moment too long, and Marianne answered. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was not cool now, nor even steady. It was quiet and low and terrible in its honesty. "You have told me nothing I have not told myself 100 times this fortnight. You are quite right. He bought me. He ruined my father and bought me to breed him and heir and keep his house, and he has never said one word of love to me, and I have no reason on earth to expect he ever will. You are quite right about all of it." A pause. "And yet I find I do not believe you. Isn't that strange? You knew him young and reckless, and I have only known him cold, and by every measure you should be the better judge. But I have watched that cold man these 3 months, Lady Calloway, and I have seen him do things he does not know I see. I have seen him have my pianoforte tuned in secret and pretend he knew nothing of it. I have seen him lay fires in the rooms I love and leave good candles in my chamber and give me the freedom of a library no one has entered in years. I have seen him look at me across that great table when he believes my eyes are elsewhere, and I know you may call me a fool, and perhaps so I am. I know the difference between a man keeping a bargain and a man in the grip of a feeling he is too frightened to name. He does not know how to love. That is not the same as being unable. You gave up on him when he was young and easy to love. I will not give up on him now that he is old and hard and has forgotten how, because I begin to think, Lady Calloway, that the loving of the difficult is the only kind that was ever worth anything, and that you never learned it, and that this, not his father's ruin, is the reason you lost him." Julian, in the corridor, could not breathe. "You are a bold creature," Sabine said, and for the first time her voice had lost its warm assurance. There was something thin in it now, something exposed. "Bolder than I took you for. Well, I wish you the joy of your project, my dear. I hope you find your feeling where you have decided to look for it. For your sake, I hope it is there. But I have known him longer than you, and I tell you there is nothing to find. And when you have looked for 20 years and found only correctness and cold, you will remember that I tried to spare you." And there was the rustle of silk, and quick hard steps, and Sabine came out of the conservatory into the corridor, and stopped at the sight of the Duke of Rathmore standing there, white-faced and stricken, who had plainly heard every word. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Sabine, recovering her composure with the speed of long practice, gave a small brittle laugh. "Julian, you look unwell. Have you taken a chill, listening at doors? You will leave Rathmore in the morning," he said. His voice was very quiet and very steady, and it frightened her more than shouting would have. He saw it. "You came into my house to unsettle my wife, and you have been permitted to do so under my roof, and that is my failure, and I will not compound it by allowing you to remain another day. My aunt may stay her fortnight if she wishes. You will not. And you will understand me, Sabine, when I tell you that if one word of what you have said in this house, one word about my marriage, or its terms, or my heart, which you were never so much its possessor as you have persuaded yourself, reaches any drawing-room in England, I will make it my particular study to see that you are not received in a single house of consequence for the rest of your natural life. I have the means. You know I have. Do not doubt that I have also, at last, the will." Sabine looked at him a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face, it was not the man she had known, not the cold correct Duke and not the reckless boy, but a third man she did not recognize, a man with something to lose and the fury of one who has just understood how nearly he lost it. "You love her," she said slowly, wonderingly, and there was in her voice, beneath the chagrin, something almost like grief. "You, after everything, you have gone and given it all away again to a baronet's daughter you bought at auction. Oh, Julian." She shook her head. "You never did learn." "No," he said. "I never did. Thank God for it. Good night, Sabine. You will be gone by 9. She went, and Julian stood alone in the corridor a moment, gathering himself, and then he turned toward the conservatory, where the woman who had defended him to his own faithless past was standing among half-saved plants. Having heard, he now realized every word of what he had said, the leaving, the threat, the naked fury of a man protecting the thing he loves. He went in. She was standing very still by the glass, the winter light behind her, and her face when she turned to him was not armored at all. It was open and uncertain and afraid to hope, in exactly the way his own heart had been afraid to hope for 11 years, and the sight of it, the sight of his own long fear looking back at him out of her eyes, undid the last of him. "You heard," she said. It was not quite a question. "I heard you defend me," he said to a woman who came into my house to convince you I was not worth defending. "And I heard you say, Marianne, I heard you say you would not give up on me." He took a step toward her and then stopped himself, because he had never in his life been less certain of his footing. "I do not have the right to that. You know I do not. I bought you." Everything she said of it was true. "I ruined your father and I bought you to keep my peace, and I have spent 3 months betraying my own intentions without the courage to tell you I was doing it. I have been the worst kind of coward, the kind who the loving thing in secret, so that he need never risk being refused." The piano fought, the fires, the candles, all of it done in silence, so that if you turned from me I could tell myself I had asked for nothing and so lost nothing. "I have been protecting myself all winter, when I ought to have been telling you the truth, and my silence has cost you a fortnight of believing you were nothing to me but a bargain, and I will not." His voice failed him. He forced it back. "I will not be silent any longer. It has ruined everything I ever loved, my silence. I will not let it ruin this. Julian, let me say it. I have waited 11 years to be able to say it, and I nearly missed the chance entirely, and I will not risk another hour." He drew a breath. His hands, he noticed distantly, were not steady, and he did not trouble to make them so. He was done, at last, with holding himself still by force of will. "I do not want Sabine Calloway. I have not wanted her in 11 years. She did not break my heart, whatever she has persuaded herself. She broke my faith, which is a different thing and worse, because a broken heart mends, and I made certain my faith never would. I built my whole life so that I would never again want anything I could lose. I decided not to feel, you saw it, that first day in the carriage. You saw it before I did, and I was proud of it. God help me, I thought it was strength. And then I rode 40 miles into the country to buy a wife I could be certain of never loving. And I found you sitting in a ruined drawing room dictating terms to the man who had come to ruin you, spending your last coin on your foolish father's peace, and something in me that I had thought was dead for good. Marianne, it was not dead. It was only waiting. It had been waiting 11 years for someone exactly like you to come along and refuse to be frightened of me." She had gone very still. The winter light was full on her face now, and he saw that her eyes were bright. "I love you," he said. The words came out rough and plain and enormous, filling the whole glass room. "I have loved you since the music room, I think, since you told me the house had only been let alone too long, since you looked at the wreck of me and my wreck of a life, and were not greedy, and were not frightened, and did not look away. I have loved you all winter and been too great a coward to say it, and I told myself it was because you could not possibly love the man who bought you, and perhaps that is true. Perhaps it is too much to ask. Perhaps I have forfeited the right by the manner of our beginning. But I heard you in this room not an hour ago tell that woman you would not give up on me, and I find I cannot be a coward a moment longer. So I am telling you the truth, Marianne, all of it, with nothing held back and no gift to hide behind. I do not want you as a bargain. I never truly did, though I lied to myself that I did. I want you as my wife in every way there is. I want to be the reason you come in from your walks with color in your face. I want to sit in that library with you every evening of my life. I want and his voice broke completely now, and he let it. I want you to love me. I know I have not earned it. I am asking for it anyway. I am asking you for your heart, though I bought everything else about you and had no right to ask for the one thing that was never for sale. It is the only thing I have ever wanted that I could not simply take, and I am on the point, I find, of begging you for it. There was a long silence. Somewhere in the great house a clock struck. The half-saved plants stood green around them in the ruined glass room she had brought back from the dead, and Marianne Ravensworth looked at her husband, at the cold, proud, impossible man, before her with his composure entirely gone, and his heart entirely. And Julian watched her face and could not read it, and thought, for one endless plummeting instant, that he had asked too much, that he had ruined it, that she would be gracious and kind and step back behind her armor and thank him and refuse. And then she crossed the room and took his face in both her hands. "You foolish, foolish man," she said, and she was laughing and weeping at once, begging, as though you had to beg. "I told you in that dreadful drawing room that a person must keep one thing. Do you remember? One last thing that is theirs and no one else's. All winter I kept mine. I would not let you buy it. I would not let you charm it away with your tuned pianofortes and your secret fires. I held on to it so fiercely, Julian. It was the only power I had left. And do you know what it was, the one thing I kept? It was my heart. It was the whole of my heart, kept back and guarded against you, because I was so afraid, so terribly afraid, that I would give it to you and you would take it as you had taken everything else, as a matter of business, as a term of the bargain, and never even know that it was a gift. That is what I was defending in here to that woman, not my pride, my heart, which I have been in love with you with since the music room too, you impossible creature, since you brought me a piano tuner from York and would not admit it, and which I have kept from you all this, because I did not believe you wanted it. And you are standing here begging me for the very thing I have been dying to give you and dared not. Julian could not speak. You want my heart, she said, and now she was weeping in earnest and smiling, and her thumbs were brushing the tears from his face that he had not known were falling. You have it. You have had it for months. You need never beg me for anything again as long as you live. Do you hear me, Julian Ravensworth? It was always yours. It was the one thing I kept, and I kept it for you, though I would have died before I told you so. It is yours. I love you, there. Now we have both been fools, and now we may stop. And Julian, Duke of Rathmore, who had built his life on wanting nothing and had at last wanted everything, gathered his wife into his arms in the green glass room she had brought back to life, and held her as though he had been drowning for 11 years and had only now been pulled ashore, and pressed his face into her hair and breathed her in and felt the whole vast cold weight he had carried since his father's death lift, finally, entirely, and be gone. They stood a long time so. Neither spoke. There was nothing left that needed saying. It had all been said. Outside the glass the winter afternoon went slowly gold as the sun came out low and clear over the frost-bright park, and the light came through the panes and lay warm across them both, and among the plants she had saved, in the room where nothing had grown for years. They stood together in the sudden sun and were at last entirely each other's. When she drew back at last, it was only to look at him, to hold his face and look at him as though she were memorizing it, and there was such wonder in her eyes, such disbelieving joy, that he had to look away and then made himself look back, 'cause he was done with looking away. "Sabine leaves at 9, he said absurdly, and Marianne laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the first he had ever heard from her, and it was the finest sound he had heard in his whole life. Then let her leave, she said, and let us never speak of her again. She was wrong about you. She was wrong about everything. She thought there was nothing left in you to find. She only never looked properly. You looked. I looked, she agreed softly. I could not help it. From the very first day, in that cold drawing room, when you told me you did not break your word, because it was nearly the only thing you had left that you had not broken. Do you remember? I thought, this is a man who has broken a great many things and knows it and grieves it, and has built a fortress out of the grieving. I thought someone ought to go into that fortress and see what is left alive in there. I did not intend it to be me. And then it was me, and I was glad, and I was terrified, and here we are. She smiled up at him. Here we are, he echoed. He took her hand, the cold, steady hand she had given him to seal a bargain 3 months and a whole lifetime ago, and he raised it to his lips, and he kissed it, and he kept it, and neither of them let go. Sabine Calloway left Rathmore at 9 the next morning, and if she carried her chagrin into the drawing rooms of England, she carried it silently, for no whisper of the Duke of Rathmore's marriage or its terms ever surfaced in any house of consequence. The Duke's warning had gone home, and Sabine, whatever her faults, understood the value of a threat delivered by a man who never made idle ones. Lady Wexcombe stayed out her fortnight, inspected the new Duchess with the sharp, cold eye of a woman who has ruled a family for 40 years, and departed pronouncing herself, to her own considerable surprise, satisfied. She had come to remind her nephew of what he had lost. She left having seen quite plainly that he had at last found something he wanted more, and being no fool, she gave up the campaign and, in the manner of aunts, promptly began to take credit for the match. But all of that was afterward. The house, once Sabine was gone and the visit ended, changed. It was not a sudden thing. Happiness rarely is, being built as it is out of 1,000 small repeated kindnesses rather than one gesture. But it changed. The windows of Rathmore, that had been dark from the road for 11 years, began to fill with light. Marianne lit them. She lit the west wing, opening rooms that had been shrouded since Julian's father's death, airing them, filling them with flowers from the conservatory she had brought back to life. She lit the music room every evening and played, and Julian came and sat, and openly now, in a chair drawn close, and sometimes she taught him to pick out a slow air with one hand, and he was very bad at it. And she laughed at him, and he found that being laughed at by Marianne was among the great pleasures of his life. They dined at the corner of the great table, close, always. They rode out together in the frost-bright mornings on the mare he had bought her, and he showed her the whole of the estate, every field and covert and tenant farm of it, and she asked him 100 questions, and he found himself telling her things he had told no one. The 5 hard years of rebuilding, the debts, the labor, the loneliness of it, the way he had come to hate the house he had saved because he had saved it alone and had no one to share it with. And she listened, and did not pity him, which he could not have borne, but understood him, which he had not known he needed until she gave it. The county, which had pronounced the new Duchess a triumph, now pronounced the Duke a changed man, and this time they were right. And the change was so marked and so evidently happy that even the most confirmed gossips gave up trying to find the scandal in it and settled, disappointed, for the truth, that the cold Duke of Rathmore had married a poor gentleman's daughter and, against every expectation including his own, fallen wholly in love with his wife. He told her father the truth. It was Marianne's doing. She came to him one evening in the spring and said that she thought she had been wrong that first day to insist Sir Edmund be kept in ignorance, not the whole of it. For the old man need never know the coldness of the beginning, but the truth of the end, the truth that his daughter was loved. He gave me away believing it, she said. Let me not leave him a lie, even a kind one. Let him know it came true. And so they went south together in April to Ashcombe. Restored now by Julian's settlement, its damp ceilings mended and its fires burning bright coal and its stable filled again, and Sir Edmund wept once more, as he had wept at the wedding, but this time Julian understood the weeping, and when the old man gripped his hand in both of his, speechless, Julian gripped it back and meant it. Marianne's sisters had their seasons. The eldest of them married a respectable clergyman with a comfortable living and a kind face for love, which Marianne had insisted upon, and Julian had quietly ensured by making plain that his sister-in-law came with a settlement generous enough to make love affordable. The younger caught the eye of a baronet and married rather grandly and was very happy about it. The brother finished his schooling and went up to Cambridge, his fees paid, his future secure, and grew into a steady young man who worshipped his brother-in-law with the uncomplicated devotion of a boy who has been rescued and knows it. And Sir Edmund, restored to comfort and relieved at last of the terror that had haunted his last years, lived on quietly at Ashcombe among his mended rooms, and came north to Rathmore every Christmas, and died at length in his own bed, an old fool much beloved, believing to the end that his family's whole happiness had flowed from the single splendid stroke of his daughter's brilliant marriage, which, in the way that matters most, it had. Julian and Marianne had, in the fullness of time, 3 children. The nursery in the east wing, that she had opened and stood enclosed so gently that first winter, was opened again, and this time it was not closed. It was papered fresh and filled with light, and the first of the Rathmore children, a dark-eyed boy who was the image of his father and the terror of the household, being fearless and much indulged, was born there on a bright autumn morning 2 years into the marriage, and Julian, who had ridden 40 miles once to purchase a wife who would give him an heir and otherwise leave him in peace, stood at the window of that nursery with his son in his arms and understood that he had received, in the end, the exact opposite of everything he had bargained for, and that it was the best bargain ever struck by a foolish, frightened, fortunate man. He never took his peace again. He had wanted once a house full of silence and a wife who asked him nothing. He got instead a house full of noise and light and children and music, a wife who asked him everything and told him everything, and would let him hide behind neither silence nor money nor his own hard-built walls, and he thanked God on his knees for the difference. The long galleries of Rathmore that had echoed empty for 11 years, echoed now with running feet and a woman's laughter and the thin true melodies of a pianoforte tuned by a man who had brought a tuner secretly from York before he had the courage to say he was in love. The windows were never dark from the road again. Travellers passing the great house in the evening saw it lit from end to end, warm and golden against the northern dusk, and remarked to one another that it looked a happy place, and could not have known how near a thing it had been, or that its whole warmth had been kindled by a plain woman in a turned gown, who had walked into it one desiring nothing but her composure and her one guarded, undefeated heart. There is a portrait of them, painted in the 3rd year of their marriage, that hangs still in the long gallery among the cold dead Ravensworths, who were all of them so unhappy. In it the Duke of Rathmore stands with his hand on his Duchess's shoulder, and she is seated, and their eldest boy leans against her knee, and the painter, a shrewd man, has caught something that the other portraits in that gallery all lack. It is not grandeur. The gallery has grandeur to spare. It is that the two people in it are looking not at the viewer, as sitters are meant to, but very slightly toward one another, as though the painter had said something and they had turned, in the same instant, to share the joke. And in the small space between their two faces there is a warmth so plain and so unforced that visitors to Rathmore, shown the gallery, always stop before that one, and always ask about it, and are always told the same thing by whichever old servant is conducting them, that this was the Duke who married for the succession and got a love match instead, and that the house had been a cold dark place before her and a warm bright one ever after, and that his Grace had been heard to say, more than once in his old age, that everything of value he had ever possessed had come to him the day a ruined baronet's daughter looked him in the eye and refused to be afraid. He said it to her, too, at the last, many years on, when they were both old and the children grown and Rathmore theirs entire, a house made wholly of the life they had built in it. They were sitting in the conservatory in the low gold light of a winter afternoon, among the plants that had grown over the decades into a green wilderness under her hand, and he took her hand, the same hand, older now, the fingers no longer cold, and he raised it to his lips as he had raised it in that room the day he begged her for her heart, and he said, "Do you remember? I once told you I did not break my word, that it was nearly the only thing I had left unbroken." "I remember everything you have ever said to me," she said. "It is a great deal, considering how little you said at the beginning." He smiled. "I have kept it. My word. Every farthing of the bargain and every promise after. But I have been thinking, my love, that I broke one thing that day, only I did not know it, and I have been glad of it every day since." "And what was that?" "Myself," said Julian, Duke of Rathmore. "The man I had made myself into." "You broke him gently, the way you break a horse that has been badly used and made savage, patiently and without cruelty, and refusing to be frightened of him until one day he discovers he does not want to be savage any longer and cannot remember why he ever was. I was a broken man when I came to you, and I did not know it, and I thought I had built something strong. And you looked at the wreck of me and were not frightened and did not look away, and you took me apart, and you put me back together into someone I had never had the courage to be." He kissed her hand again. "So I did break my word, in a manner. I said I would leave you in peace and let you leave me in mine. And I have spent 40 years failing to keep it, thank God, and I would fail to keep it again every day of another 40 if I were granted them. You never once left me in peace, Marianne. You gave me something far better. You gave me a home. She could not answer him. She only turned her hand in his so their fingers laced, and leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in the green and gold light of the room where nothing had grown and now everything did. Two old people who had begun with a cold bargain and ended with the truest love either had known, and the winter sun came low through the glass and lay warm across them both, and the great house rose bright and full of life around them, every window lit, no longer lonely, and never so again.